Welcome to Phone Hunt. I'm Jiao Pierre Ruth for Information Week. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at the state of state-based data privacy laws. We have a number of states that have data privacy laws that are due to take effect coming up in 2025, 2026, and some of the more closer years up ahead. So we're going to take a look at what has already kind of been in play and again try to get a barometer for what may be in the offing. There's definitely been data privacy laws that have come into effect on the international stage for sure, but the United States has yet to come together with any kind of national data privacy laws. So we're going to take a look at the way things are shaping up at the state level. Now, to dive in and to dissect this topic, we're going to have a great group of stakeholders and experts that have brought together. We have Andy Lunsford, who is a former privacy attorney and the current co-founder and CEO of BreachRx. We have Krysten Jenci, Cisco's data privacy policy lead. Sean Costigan, managing director of resilience strategy at Red Sift. And Ravi, I actually have to ask you to help me with this one. Ravi Srinivasan.
That's right.
All right. CEO of Votiro. All of you, thank you so much for making the time today for the show.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Okay, great. All right. So again, we are coming up to the final weeks of 2024, looking into what might start happening in the near years to come. So Andy, I was hoping you could kick us off with your thoughts on what are state level policies that seem to be coming into play now, that are comparable to data privacy laws on the international stage.
Yes. Yeah. So it's the privacy space internationally in the U.S. has been interesting. There's kind of this different approach to privacy. It's in the EU. It's very much a fundamental right is where they start from. So it's a right for every single individual. In the U.S., we started more with how do we protect people's personal information from an identity theft perspective, economic harm perspective. And so our laws, or data breach laws specifically, came out with a lot of very prescriptive. These are the data types that matter. If these things get exposed, these are the requirements you face as a company to report to regulators, consumers, et cetera. Versus the EU was much more broad language around is this information that can be tied to a person, and that kind of broad approach made for a much more comprehensive number of things that could be included. And then when laws like GDPR come in and have penalties that are up to 4% of global revenue, it's really caught a lot of people's attention. And so we've really seen this wave from once GDPR came into effect. California was leading the way with CCPA, and now we have multiple states that have what they call comprehensive privacy laws that are taking more and more of these EU-like approaches, covering more and more topics about how is data taken. Did you have consent to take it? Are you using it the way that you say you're going to use it? And if you're transferring it around, do you have the authority to do that? Have you notified the consumer for that? And now we're seeing some states getting more aggressive in the way that they're going to go about enforcing. I think the Texas AG came out with some pretty bold statements about how they're going to be going after technology companies. And then obviously in California, when CPRA came into effect, that was where they've actually got an enforcement agency that's funded by the fines that it introduces. So I think we are seeing a shift of kind of close following. There's still a lot of differences, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of hope for a big U.S. law that's going to bring it all together. It's just going to be the reality that we have different state laws, different sector laws, and it's going to be really important that every company has a way to operationalize handling all that.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that. And speaking of potential or lack thereof on the national level, Krysten, are we approaching any kind of national consensus on data privacy laws? Are state laws starting to kind of inform a framework for national policy potentially, or is there kind of really kind of, to be honest, there's too much happening in Washington D.C. for national policy to come together on this at this stage?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, it's a great one, and one we've been working. I know so many folks in the space have been working on for so long. I remember working in the Commerce Department under the Obama administration back in 2012. We were talking of launching this Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights that we thought would pave the way for federal privacy legislation back in 2012. So It is a very complex issue. I will say, Cisco has long been a supporter of the concept of federal privacy law. We think, especially in the age of artificial intelligence, we should have a foundation of privacy protections built in that would make everybody, I think, more comfortable with AI and all the applications that are available. I wanted to touch on something Andy said, and that's this, different approaches between the US and the European Union, for example, where the European Union considers privacy a fundamental human right, which poses a lot of challenges just because it's a different approach. But I will say our company has, our CEO, Chuck Robbins, has said, privacy is a fundamental human right. That's the way we treat it at our company. We build privacy and operationalize it into everything we do, our products, our services, our operations, to try to, get ahead of what might be coming. Back on the national front on privacy legislation, the details really matter, and there are so many stakeholders involved. It is challenging, but we remain hopeful that the conversation will continue. But since we've been at this for decades now, I think it's hard to predict how this will happen. I did just want to add really quickly, Cisco just released a consumer privacy survey where it really showed that many more consumers, 53%, are aware of privacy laws now and seem to be more interested in this topic than they were before. Again, I think AI is a piece of that puzzle. So I think consumers and companies both think that if we have some clear, certain rules around this, it would be helpful for all parties. So anyway, I think it's hard to predict what will happen on the federal front. We remain hopeful. We think it's a good idea, but it is, like you say, the Washington, D.C., other things are on people's minds at this moment.
Yeah. Gotcha. Appreciate your thoughts on that. Okay. Ravi, just looking at the way things are right now, how stifling are current data privacy laws, and how are they expected, if anyway, how are they expected to change in the coming years?
Yeah, thank you, JP, for the opportunity to be on this panel. To me, from a perspective, from the consumer's perspective, certainly having a set of privacy laws that they can refer to, building confidence in how the consumers interact on the web. To me, that's a positive side of having data privacy laws. However, there's a lot of patchwork in terms of how the US has implemented a lot of these privacy laws. From a business perspective, if the perspective is take a legal approach and saying, how am I going to operationalize every single privacy laws, given that many businesses are not just within a state, they work across multiple states, and they work even in a global framework and a global ecosystem. How does an organization adhere to the various privacy laws? In that perspective, I would say it is stifling, because a lot of organizations have to invest in additional legal expertise, additional data security infrastructure. And that's certainly an important aspect of what an organization needs to do. So from a perspective of where, as Votiro, we're a small and medium business, helping organizations around the globe. And what we find time and time again is when security leaders look at privacy as security equals privacy, we see a path forward. When they start seeing privacy as a separate activity from security, that's when we see a lot of roadblocks and challenges as they navigate the infrastructure and operations.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right. Well, actually speaks into the next question, because we're getting to the operational side of things. Sean, your thoughts, what operational practices might need to change in order to comply with, some of the state policies that are either already in play or, they're on the cusp of, going into effect in the coming years?
Yeah, thanks so much, JP, and thanks. Let me pick up something that Ravi just said, because I think it's very clear you can't have privacy without security. And we've heard this before. We should repeat that mantra. I think the bit that strikes me, though, however, is the rather negative scorecard that we've seen, where organizations of all types, corporations, nonprofits, government, it doesn't matter, have been really poor stewards of data, right, and data security for the last couple of decades. And I think, if we can start encouraging, we need to change the conversation a bit to encourage better stewardship, right, for organizations of all types. And one way to do that is by aligning your understanding about your risks with your spend in cybersecurity and with privacy. And that can be done at an organizational level, at a smaller level. It doesn't necessarily have to start with legislation. It can start with a rewiring of how we come to understand security and privacy, not as cost centers, but rather as things that are valuable enablers of your organization. And I think that just has to happen that can happen at chambers of commerce. It can happen at all sorts of different spaces that doesn't rely necessarily on regulation as the first driver. And so that's where I'd start. I think we, at Red Sift, I would just say we talk, particularly about reasonable, proactive cybersecurity measures. There are all sorts of things that can be done that are relatively low cost, right? But have a great ROI. And that's also true in the privacy space. Last, I'd say, when I speak, with, my friends, who are much more adept and knowledgeable in this space than I am, they'll say, there is a real ROI for compliance. And that's something that seems to be poorly understood as well here. So I'd flip all that back a bit and say, how do we realign the questions, right? So that we address the organizations in a way that they don't feel like they've been put upon necessarily with, the heavy hand of government, but that they have a way forward. And that's my perspective. But thank you for the question and getting that. Yeah.
If I could, I'd love to add on to that. We, with BreachRx, we focus on incident response. And the biggest thing we see is that a lot of organizations have viewed incident response and security as purely security issues, or just purely, as you guys are talking about,
precisely
separated, totally privacy issue. These are business problems that actually take the entire business coming together. And that's not clear to people. I think at times they think that security is a very technical issue, or privacy is just this one legal issue. That's not my problem, but it actually is a huge business problem. And it really comes, it kind of rears its head in the incident response space, particularly because in order to respond well to any incident, you have to bring the whole business together, and you can't take a siloed approach, because that's what really leads to chaos and fines, and unfortunately now personal liability for a lot of the executives involved. Not just the CISOs, but the CEOs are getting called out, the CFOs are getting called out, and that's a big change.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate both of your thoughts on that. And then, again, I appreciate everyone's individual thoughts on those questions. Now, for all of you, what kind of tone have state data privacy laws set, the ones that have come in place, the ones that are due to come into place, for how policymakers want companies to handle and be stewards of data? As we're talking about stewardship, again, let's talk about how stringent these policies are, and how much do they really vary by state, or are they very comparable, at least in the U.S., or there is a variation by industry? All of you, what are your thoughts?
I can go first. JP, I mean, one of the things that we've seen as a progression in pretty much a lot of these privacy laws, that they've all started with guidelines and perspective of how to manage the consumer's data, to very quickly at year 1, year 2, year 3, started adding enforcement mechanisms and fines as well. So as you see that happened at the global stage with the European laws, we've seen that happening in the States here in the US. My perspective is these are going to continue to evolve as states start to see breaches continuing to happen. And the original premise of a lot of these privacy laws were, how are we going to protect the consumer's data and still be able to operate the business on a day-to-day basis? But as breaches continue to happen, the laws need to continue to evolve, and we continue to see that becoming more stringent and the tone of it strengthening to the point where they want more liability, more fines, and And that's why, to me, as we were describing earlier in the call, discussions like these are very helpful. Discussions like these podcasts are helpful to have the conversation on how to enable the organization to stop thinking of privacy laws as yet another compliance cost, but to move to how are you going to safeguard the data?
To listen to the entire conversation, look for the Dasso and Hunt podcast on Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music, and other popular podcast platforms.